The world blinked. Suddenly, there was a voice inside of Junpei's head. Truth had gone, truth had gone, and truth had gone. Now truth is asleep in the darkness of the sinister hand. What the hell was that? That voice? Junpei was utterly and completely baffled. Huh? What are you talking about?
What's up?
Seven and Clover ran over to him, but Junpei didn't know what to tell them. If he told them he'd heard a voice, they'd laugh, or worse, think he was going insane. So all he said was, "Oh, nothing." He cleared his throat a little too loud and looked pointedly down at his bracelet. There were a pair of small buttons protruding from either side of it. Junpei pressed them in a particular order. Right, left, right, left, right, left. That was it. Eight numbers blinked on and then off on the bracelet display. Junpei checked one last time. "1438-3421. Huh?
Eh?
Hey, what the hell were those numbers?
Oh my gosh, are those?
Junpei didn't answer. He simply walked straight to the coffin. He knelt down in front of the keypad, running over the numbers in his head so that he wouldn't forget. 1438-3421. 1438-3421. With trembling fingers, he punched them in. That was all of them. He punched the E button. There was a moment of complete silence. Then there was the sound of the coffin lid unlatching. Someone sat up out of it. Oh, is that you, Clover? I apologize for worrying you. Snake! Oh my, how did you... Junpei and Seven, is that you? Is everyone else there as well? Just like Rip Van Winkle. Still, it was very much like Snake to simply cut to the heart of the matter and ask. Junpei and Seven shared a wry smile. Clover's eyes were filled with tears. You're back! With a cry of joy, she leaped into Snake's arms. Gently now. My body's still a little weak. You're back! You're back! Clover looked like nothing so much as a lost child who had finally found her home. She cried and cried and cried. Her eyes were red and her nose was running. She hiccuped and gasped as if she were about to begin hyperventilating. You're back! You're really here! Her voice was happy but almost desperate, as if she feared he would disappear again if she stopped talking to him. Tear after tremendous tear rolled its way down her face. Her small arms strained as she clutched Snake's body as tightly as she could. Perhaps she had to convince herself he was real. Perhaps she simply didn't know what else to do. Oh, you're back. Come now, what's gotten into you? You're acting as though I've returned from the grave.
Because I thought you were dead!
Huh?
You jerk! Idiot, idiot, idiot!
Clover broke into sobs so great she could no longer talk. It was a touching reunion between brother and sister. Even though Junpei knew they had little time and every minute they waited was a minute they wasted, it felt cruel to pull them apart. Junpei and Seven sat down on one of the pews, waiting for Clover to calm down before explaining to Snake what had transpired. I see. I believe I understand things rather well now. Thank you. In the shower room, there was a dead body wearing my clothes. Because of that, you thought that I was dead, correct? He had quickly and neatly summarized the events of several hours. Junpei nodded. You also discovered a corpse in the captain's quarters, and Santa turned on you here, in this room. Do I have it straight? Seven had been rather surprised to learn of the dead body in the captain's quarters. With everything that had taken place, Junpei had simply forgotten to mention it to him. Well then, I've got a pretty decent idea of what happened while I was indisposed, but it's still something of a mystery who did all this and why. The corpse in the shower room that looked like me, and the corpse in the captain's quarters. Why were they killed in the way they were? You don't know? No, why would I? The guy in the shower room. We don't know who he is, so let's just call him Mr. X. Anyway, this Mr. X is wearing Snake's clothes. But you're wearing some kind of weird robes. That means someone took your clothes and put them on Mr. X. We need to figure out who that was. I apologize, but I have no idea who might have done this to me. I only just now woke up. I was unconscious during all the events you just described to me. They must have undressed me and changed my clothes during that time.
When were you knocked out?
When we split up to look for the red. Where did they get you? Do you remember? It was a small room in one of the hallways on C deck. What happened? The same thing that happened to every one of us when we were abducted. A can releasing some sort of gas was thrown into the room. I believe the gas is some sort of incapacitating agent.
Then that means it was...
Zero. Looks that way, huh? There's nothing else I have to tell you. When I woke up, I was in this coffin. Junpei crossed his arms in thought. Why had Zero made Mr. X wear Snake's clothes? How had the results of that trick benefited Zero? It was a mystery. Junpei couldn't make sense of it. He also didn't have a satisfactory explanation for how he discerned the key code for the coffin. It just didn't make sense. Truth had gone, and truth had gone. What did that mean? Did it mean anything? And why had Junpei felt compelled to push the buttons on the bracelet after hearing them? Seven had asked him about it while they waited for Clover to finish crying. He'd had no answer for him then, and he still didn't. All he could say was that it seemed to have been a subconscious reaction. His fingers had simply moved of their own accord. It was the only explanation that made any sort of sense. And it made almost no sense. Junpei had no idea what any of it meant. His mind was a maelstrom of mysteries, clues, theories, and more mysteries. He could barely think. And of course, Snake and Clover had been subjects in a similar experiment 9 years ago.
The ability to access a morphogenetic field is affected by a couple of things. The first is epiphany, and the other is danger. And someone did actually die. A girl. Her name was,
There had been another experiment conducted on the same ship 9 years ago. A girl had died during it. Morphogenetic field theory. The two murders. Switching clothes. The nonary game. And whatever strange thing was happening to Junpei himself. The maelstrom in his head spat out words and ideas that disappeared back into it almost as soon as he grasped them. But as he struggled through them, Junpei began to realize something. There was something that tied all of them together. 0. He was the ringleader, the person who had trapped 9 people on a sinking ship. 0 knew everything. If they could uncover Zero's identity, all of their questions would be answered. Who was Zero? Junpei had the beginnings of a theory. If he could only test it, or perhaps... At any rate, we'll have plenty of time to decipher the details later. For now, it is of utmost importance that we escape. Junpei, it was 4:30 the last time you checked the clock, yes? That means we have less than an hour. We must hurry. Hey, how are we going to get out of here? Isn't that obvious? Through the other number 9 door. 5 plus 4 plus 7 plus 2 equals 18. 1 plus 8 equals 9. Oh yeah, you're right. With Snake, we can open the door.
Don't tell me you hadn't figured that out.
As they sniped back and forth, Junpei glanced at Snake's left hand. He was wearing a bracelet with a 2 on it. Come on, you gotta tell me these things. I assumed you'd figured it out. Ah, forget it. Let's just get going. 7 stumped off toward the smaller number 9 door. Clover, Snake, and Junpei followed. 7 quickly laid his hand on the red. An asterisk appeared on the screen. Junpei and the others followed suit and laid their hands on the scanner panel. Soon, there were 4 asterisks on the screen. 7 glanced at them, then laid his hand on the lever of the red. All right, you guys ready to go? Yes.
Yup.
Junpei paused for a moment. Not yet. Oh God, come on, dude. Huh? Before we go in, I'd like to check something. You want to check something? Yeah, but before I do, 7, could you pull the lever? I want to make sure we can verify with just the 4 of us. What do you mean? We don't need... Just do it, alright? But if the door opens, don't go in yet, okay? Please, this is really important. I really need to check this, okay? Work with me here. Junpei looked directly into 7's eyes. The older man looked back for a moment, then nodded. Fine. Seven pulled down on the lever and door 9 creaked open. Then they waited. 6, 7, 8... After 9 seconds, the door closed. Alright, that means the 4 of us can go into door 9. So, we knew that already. It's obvious. Obvious? Yeah, you're right. It is. Now, what happens if we add Zero's bracelet? What? Zero's bracelet? Why don't you take it out, Clover? For a moment, Clover looked surprised, but she recovered quickly and stuck her tongue out at Junpei.
So you did know I had it. I picked it up because I thought it might be useful sometime.
She reached into one of the pockets of her voluminous jacket and produced a bracelet. Junpei took it from her and turned to 7. This was in the left hand of the corpse in the captain's quarters. If you look at it, you can see it's got a 0 on the face. Just to make this a little easier to talk about, I'm gonna call the guy we found dead in the captain's quarters Cap. If Cap was really 0, then I should be able to open door 9 with just me, Clover, and his bracelet. 5 plus 4 plus 0 equals 9. But most importantly, if you were Cap, and this was your game, would you really put one of those bracelets on yourself? Anyway, let's just give it a shot. Clover, give me your hand.
Okay.
After he and Clover scanned the bracelets, he waved caps over the scanner panel. Then he pulled the lever. However, the door didn't open. The reds display read error. I knew it. Now, what does this tell us? Maybe the bracelet has to be on your wrist in order for it to work? No, that's impossible. Did you see how the panel showed a third asterisk when I scanned Cap's bracelet? Whether or not it's on your wrist doesn't matter. All you have to do is put the bracelet near the panel for it to register. 7 waved his bracelet in front of the scanner panel. Sure enough, a single asterisk appeared on the red. Huh, looks like you're right. See? So what does that mean? There's only one possibility. The bracelet isn't the number 0. Is that what you're saying? That's right.
Then what number is it?
Let's find out. Junpei looked at the panel. It had 1 red asterisk from 7's bracelet. He hefted the captain's and swiped it, and his own passed the red. 7 plus Junpei equals 7 plus 5 equals 12. 1 plus 2 equals 3. If this combination opened the door, then Cap's bracelet was number 6. Hey, it opened! The door opened!
What? Why? What does that mean?
Both 7 and Clover seemed rather shaken as they turned to look at Junpei for answers. The door slid heavily shut. Junpei raised an eyebrow. Isn't it obvious? Cap's bracelet is number 6. 7 plus 5 plus 6 equals 18. 1 plus 8 equals 9. But doesn't it say 0? This isn't a 0. The symbol on here isn't a number 0. It's a letter O. O?
Whoa, wait a minute. I don't get it. I mean, we figured out that Cap's bracelet is 6, right?
Yeah?
Does that mean there are 2 people with 6s?
Before Junpei could answer, Snake spoke up. There is most likely only one person with a 6.
But I don't get it. What about June?
Well, this is only an educated guess, but I think June's number was never 6 to begin with. Her bracelet was flipped. In other words, June's real number is 9? That seems the most likely.
Then all this numbered door stuff was just a load of crap.
Why would you say that?
Because if June is 9, then the numbers wouldn't match up.
Clover grabbed Junpei's notebook and began to write furiously in it. Junpei leaned over to look at it. List of all the numbered doors June's gone through. Clover read each row out loud so that Snake could follow along.
All right, I made a list of all the numbered doors that June has gone through so far. I wrote down which door she went into and with who. And I wrote what all the numbers were. So if you switch 9 in wherever there's a 6, the numbers don't work. If the digital root is 7, then you can't open door 4. If the digital root is 2, then you can't open door 8.
Clover, do you notice anything interesting on that list?
What do you mean?
You're talking about 3, right?
3?
Santa's always in the room with her. That's what you're saying, isn't it? Yes, exactly.
What about it?
That's quite simple, really. So is Lotus. You told me that the first time you came to this room, Santa was the first to refuse to leave June behind. Now, doesn't that beg the question why? Why would Santa do such a thing? The answer is easy. because Santa can't open door 9 with only 7 in Lotus. Of course, there's only one reason for that. His number isn't actually 3. Santa's real number. 7, would you be so kind as to modify my sister's equations? Yeah, sure. 7 took the pen from a confused Clover and began to adjust her calculations. This is what you were getting at, right, Snake? He read out the changes he'd made when he finished. He looked at Snake. Snake smiled. Thank you, that is exactly right, 7. Santa's true number wasn't 3. It was 0.
No way! Santa is 0?
And June was 9, not 6. On the contrary, Santa was 0, not 3. Plus 3 and minus 3. They cancel one another out. Nothing appears out of order. Then that means that even though he set the whole damn thing up, Santa was still playing by the rules of the nonary game this whole time. Precisely.
So you're saying Santa planned this whole thing?
I'm not sure if he acted alone or not, but I think it is safe to conclude that he is 0, if my hypothesis is correct. Clover bit her lip. She seemed to be having some difficulty believing her brother's explanation. Junpei. Junpei remained silent and thought. Snake's hypothesis didn't satisfy him. Jun's bracelet was flipped. Even if that were possible, then there would have been 2 number 9 bracelets. And if that were the case... Alright, that's enough talking. Let's go. It's high time we went through that door. Door 9 opened. They leaped through. The den was directly in front of them as they came through the door. Quickly, they scanned their bracelets. And the detonator stopped. Whew. After pausing for a moment to catch their collective breath, Junpei and his companions headed down the long hallway in front of them. At the end was a set of stairs leading down into the ship. It looked as though they led all the way to the bottom deck. They looked down. It didn't seem to be flooded. After deciding it was safe, they headed down the stairs. Before long, Junpei and his companions found themselves on the bottom deck. They turned left into another hallway, at the end of which they found another door. And of course, there was a symbol engraved over the keyhole. It looked like the sort of harpoon one would use to hunt fish, the kind with 3 prongs. Snake traced the shape of it with his fingers. This is the Neptune symbol. There must be a key around here somewhere. Neptune key. All Junpei had was the Uranus key card. Not the same planet, and not even the same sort of key. Clearly it wasn't going to open this door. After examining the door for a few more minutes, they gave up and headed back the way they'd come. With a little more searching, they found a metal door. To the side of it was a card reader. A symbol was engraved onto the card reader. It matched the Uranus symbol on the key card Junpei was carrying. This is the place. He muttered to himself and slid the card through the reader. It beeped once, and the light on it turned green. With a heavy metal groan, the door creaked open. Junpei, Clover, Snake, and 7 looked at one another, nodded, and stepped through. The room they found themselves in was full of books. It looked remarkably like a library. Not the sort of library where large numbers of people came to read books, more the sort of library that was simply a place to store books. He felt a little overwhelmed by the sheer number of books, but Junpei did his best to speak with authority. All right, if we want to get through that door out there, We need the Neptune key. I say we split up and look for it.
Okay.
Very well. Sure thing. Good, let's get started then. We don't have a lot of time. Hurry! Alice sleeps in a small chamber past the forest of knowledge. As he began his search, for reasons he didn't fully understand, Junpei felt those particular words float through his mind. They continued to search for a while longer and found a number of books. Perhaps, they had hoped, there was a clue hidden in them somewhere. Junpei pulled each one off the shelf and flipped through it. Then suddenly he noticed something that stopped him cold. The author's name. Sheldrake. At first he didn't realize he'd said the name out loud. When Snake approached him, he jumped. Have you heard of him? Sheldrake, I mean. Yeah, Lotus told me about him. There's a British biochemist named Sheldrake. He had a rather interesting theory. The theory of morphogenetic fields, which relies on the theory of morphic resonance. Really? From Lotus, huh? Well, Clover also said something to me about that stuff. She did? Yeah, what was it?
The ability to access a morphogenetic field is affected by a couple of things. The first is epiphany, and the other is danger.
That girl, I told her not to tell anyone. You did? Why? Junpei's eyes narrowed. Look, man, I didn't push it because we're in a hurry, but I'm kind of sick of this. How about you just tell me, okay? Tell you what? Don't give me that about the experiment. Snake's shoulders slumped and he shook his head slowly. He'd finally given up. Very well, fine, I'll tell you everything. I suppose I might as well start by telling you why I kept quiet, and why I made sure Clover did as well. To be honest, the explanation is quite simple. Zero told me not to. I had little choice. He didn't walk up and tell me, of course. He gave me a message engraved on a card. Snake reached into his sleeve and pulled out a small, stiff piece of paper. It looked a good deal like the one he'd shown everyone on the central staircase. So you had 2 cards. No, only one. Huh? What do you mean? I thought that card just had some rules for the nonary game on it. Yes, it did. And those were the rules I read you. However, they were not the only thing on the card. There was something I didn't read. Well, perhaps I should say, there was something I couldn't read. And that was... Tell no one of the events that took place 9 years ago. Tell, and I activate your sister's detonator. Oh. Well, Snake nodded. Well, what about Clover? Did she get a message from Zero too? I don't believe she did. But doesn't it strike you as strange that Zero would shut my mouth, but not hers? To be on the safe side, however, I told her it was best not to tell anyone. Still, apparently she told you. That girl. What's wrong with her telling me? I figured some stuff out with the things she told me. I mean, it looks like the whole activate her detonator thing was just a bluff. She's prancing around downstairs, happy as a clam now that you're back. Snake glanced down at Clover and Seven, examining one of the bookshelves. That's very true. I've decided I can trust you. I've decided to tell you the truth. The chance that Santa is Zero is very high. I feel I can assume Santa doesn't have the time to observe us at the moment. And at any rate, even if he were, I very much doubt he would kill us. Why not? Clover told me about the 4-leaf clover, about the words. If he knew about that, then he was in my group during the first experiment. I'm sure of it. He wouldn't kill us, no matter what the situation was. Snake paused and cocked his head as though he was listening to something very far away. His face looked dark, as though something was weighing on him. Hey, Snake? Junpei wasn't quite sure what to say. Snake turned and looked at him. Yes, I know. You want to know what happened during the experiment. Yeah. How much do you know? Junpei relayed to Snake everything Clover had told him. The morphogenetic field and the experiments 9 years prior that had dealt with it. How the experiment had taken place simultaneously at 2 locations, one being the ship and the other being a building in Nevada. How they'd played the nonary game. He told him everything. And finally, he told him how a girl had died during the experiment. Oh, she told you all that, did she? Snake looked down. His face was tight. A slight tremor shook his body, and he tried to hide it. He was putting on a good front, but even Junpei could tell that he was holding back something deep and powerful. He made as if to brush something from his face and looked up at Junpei. At any rate, I now know how much you've learned. All that remains for us to determine is who did this and why, right? Yes. Can you tell me what happened? Snake nodded slowly. The people who organized the initial experiment were from a company called Cradle Pharmaceutical. There were 4 of them running the show. Gentaro Hongo, Nagisa Nijisaki, Teruaki Kubota, Kagechiga Musashiro. Hongo was the CEO of Cradle Pharmaceutical. Nijisaki was his right-hand man, and did the lion's share of the planning. Kubota led the company's research and development division. Musashido was their majority stockholder. It was these 4 people who planned the initial experiment. Let me simplify it for you. Hongo designed it, and Nijisaki put it all together. Kubota developed the technology required, and Musashido provided the cash. So it's Hongo, Nijisaki, Kubota, Musashido. Junpei couldn't shake the sense that he had heard those 4 names somewhere before. Of course, more than 4 people were required to conduct an experiment of this scale. To that end, they organized a top-secret team to assist them with their research. All in all, they gathered 10 people or so. Those 10 completed their team, and they were able to begin the project. They named it the Nonary Project. The purpose of the experiment was to research the prospect of controlling a human mind through sheer will. The vessel, I suppose you could say, for this control was the morphogenetic field. Why did the glycerin suddenly begin to crystallize? Why did the crystal structure of EDT undergo a sudden change? Why did the rats improve their puzzle-solving skills with each generation? Experiments with humans produced the same results. The more people who knew the answer to a question, the more people there were who could answer correctly without having seen the problem before. Why? How? The answer is that the shape of the answer has been stored in a field invisible to the naked eye. And through that field, the resonant event transmits information related to that answer. That's essentially the idea behind morphogenetic fields. But that's just a theory. Can't bring yourself to believe it? Not really. Let's say someone killed another person because the devil told them to do it. Whether the devil exists or not has no relevance to the murderer. They believe the devil exists. Whether or not he does is immaterial. So what matters here is that Hongo believed in the morphogenetic field. Snake nodded. But I still don't get it. You said they wanted to figure out how to control people, right? That is what you were saying. Yes. So how are they going to do that with a morphogenetic field? I'll keep it simple. Let's suppose 10,000 people have solved a certain problem. The chance of you knowing that answer, even if no one has told you, will go up. Let's have another example, shall we? Say 1 million people were to do a handstand right now. Tomorrow, the chances of you doing a handstand would be higher, even if you had heard nothing of this hypothetical mass handstanding. Mankind's thought process and actions are all part of a resonant event. All the resonant events encoded in the fields are projected onto you. Of course, this assumes you believe in this theory. Do you follow so far? Yeah. But let's say, hypothetically, that there was a person who had the same effect as those millions of people. What would happen? If that one person were to do a handstand, other people would find themselves wanting to do handstands as well. Can you imagine what a person with powers like that would be able to do? Come on, there's no way. I'm not done. Imagine another scenario. Imagine another person. This is an ordinary person. Let's say he does a handstand. What if there was someone who could grab the resonant event he created by doing that and use it to make other people do handstands? What would happen then? A person who has the power to write to the field and someone who can read from the same. You could think of them as the writer and the reader, or the transmitter and the receiver. What would the world be like if there were people with abilities like these? Junpei thought about it for a moment. So the transmitter's resonant event can be transmitted through the field and sent to the receiver. And then the transmitter can control the receiver however they wish. That's what you're saying, right? Yes, close enough at least. Come on, that's just crazy. Well, if you want to prove that, then you'll have to test it first. At least, that was how they thought. That was why they decided to do their experiment. That was how the Nonary project began. Snake suddenly looked very serious. Junpei, have you ever heard of the Ganzfeld experiment? No, I haven't. Junpei shook his head. You place a pair of subjects in separate rooms. Then you show one a picture and ask the other what they see. In theory, it is supposed to test for the existence of telepathy. Oh? So why do you bring up the Ganzfeld experiment? Do we even have time for all of this? It was used to screen subjects for the Nonary project. The hospital in a remote town was affiliated with Cradle Pharmaceutical. Hongo used it to conduct experiments on visiting children in secret. Some of them, he found, had potential. He began to gather children that showed promise, children that seemed as though they might be able to access the field. Of course, none of them volunteered. They were kidnapped. His face barely moved as he spoke. There were 9 pairs of siblings taken, for 18 children total. For reasons that were not fully understood at the time, each pair had 1 transmitter and 1 receiver. They were split perfectly. As such, the 18 children were split into 2 groups of 9. The children who were put in Group Q were the ones who excelled at transmitting. They were transferred to the mock experiment building known as Building Q in the Nevada desert. The children who excelled at receiving were put in Group A. The members of Group A were placed on the former hospital ship Gigantic. From the experiments he had conducted so far, Hongo had learned the following. There are 2 things that can increase one's resonance with the fields. The first is epiphany, the other is danger. Have you ever been faced with an especially difficult problem and thought about it very long and very hard until finally an answer suddenly appeared in your mind? It may seem obvious to say so, but that is what it is meant by epiphany. The information obtained through that epiphany can be easily transmitted through the fields, where it can be easily interpreted. Adding danger to that equation allows for even easier field access. Therefore, Hongo set up a number of puzzles across the Gigantic. The participants had to solve each puzzle before they could move to the next room. Of course, he hadn't forgotten to include danger. More specifically, he had detonated a bomb on the hull of the Gigantic. The children in Group A were forced to play the Nonary game as the ship sunk. By forcing the children into a life or death situation, Hongo hoped to increase the likelihood of their tapping into the fields. The children from Group Q, on the other hand, were confined to the mock experiment building, Building Q. Building Q duplicated the interior and the puzzles of the Gigantic exactly. Hongo explained the situation to the children in Group Q. Solve the puzzles you find throughout the rooms. When you solve them, transmit that information to the children in Group A. If you succeed, they will be able to solve the puzzles and escape. But if you fail, then the Gigantic will sink, and your brothers and sisters will drown. Do you know why the astronauts of Apollo 13 were able to return to Earth safely? It was because NASA had access to a replica of the Apollo 13 capsule. All of the equipment, the instruments, everything, all of it identical. NASA was able to replicate the situation the astronauts were facing. By putting themselves in the same situation, they attempted to solve the problems they knew the astronauts were experiencing. Once they had found solutions, they reported their findings to the men aboard the actual capsule. That was how they were able to return safely. It was the same with Gigantic and Building Q. The children from Group Q had to use the power of Epiphany to solve the puzzles they found and transmit what they learned through the fields. The children in Group A, however, had to access the fields to learn how they might advance to the next stage. That is the simplest explanation I can manage. Snake sounded defeated. His half-hearted attempt at derision served only to show him how much the story had affected him. Just as Junpei was about to speak. "Hey, Junpei, Snake! How much longer are you two gonna sit around with those bony asses? Get down here already!" Seven's voice echoed up from below. Snake took a deep breath and blinked rapidly, as if just waking up from a long nap. He's right. Let's go, shall we? We don't have much time. We need to get out of here, and soon. Snake headed for the stairs, but Junpei put out an arm to stop him. Hold it, there's one more thing I want to ask you. Are you sure that there were 18 kids? Why? Well, I thought it was only 16. Oh, yes, that was what they said on the news, wasn't it? Yes, I have no doubt that 18 children were abducted and used in Hongo's experiment. After all, you couldn't exactly play a nonary game with any less, could you? Well, yeah, but... Are you saying that the news got it wrong? Yes, I am. There were 2 more children. However, they had no relatives that I'm aware of. I imagine no one filed a police report when they went missing. They were brother and sister, like Clover and I. The brother's name was Aoi. The sister's name was... Her name was... Snake couldn't seem to bring himself to continue. It looked as if what he was about to say brought him great pain. Her name was Akane. That was the girl who died. Junpei felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. His vision went blurry, and his head felt light. He couldn't think straight. Everything was blank. Had Akane Kurashiki died 9 years ago? If she had, then who was June? No, that was impossible. It couldn't be true. Akane wasn't an uncommon name. If Snake had known her last name, then that would have been a different matter entirely. So they shared a name. There were many other people who did as well. It meant nothing. It was a different person. Of course it was a different person. It had to be. Junpei shook his head hard and pulled himself back to reality. Is something wrong, Junpei? Your breathing sounds strange. Then Snake had noticed. Junpei cleared his throat and tried to act calm. Oh no, it's nothing. I'm fine. Let's get back down there, all right? He couldn't bring himself to ask. He told himself he knew the answer already, but he couldn't bring himself to ask what the girl's last name had been.